So in the last lecture, we discussed the transformation of American manufacturing. In this lecture, I want to emphasize that you didn't have to work in manufacturing in order to experience significant changes in the lived nature of reality in the 19th century as a result of the social and cultural changes that the early Industrial Revolution caused to take place. Expansion of markets, division of labor, and separation of the home and the workplace had widespread social and cultural effects. For example, if you worked in agriculture in upstate New York, the fact that the canal had gone through meant that even though you were still a farmer, you too might begin specializing in how you farm, and you were less likely to think in terms of economic independence, economic self-dependence, farming only for your own use, and more likely to try to maximize efficiency of production to sell your goods in the larger marketplace. If you lived in upstate New York in 1820, you were far away from efficient markets. By the 1840s, if you lived in upstate New York, you were actually in the middle of a very efficient and growing market. And that might change the way you went about economic production, and it might change the way you went about life, even if you didn't make shoes for a living. And many of the recreational patterns we will be discussing when we talk about the emergence in the 19th century of a variety of modernized sports will bear some relationship to the fact that it's more and more likely throughout the 19th century that you live in a world where the home and the workplace are distinct, and where time devoted to work and time devoted to play and recreation are distinct. Another development that took place when patriarchal authority began to break down because of the changed geography of the city is that you began to find Americans trying to create new forms of social structure and new forms of social power to try to replace some of the old forms that broke down when the older system began to go away. And so you didn't have to make shoes in order to experience significant transformations as a result of these changes. And in many ways, the difference conceptually between a pre-modern or traditional society and a modern society are related to what side of those transformations you found yourself on. Another aspect of these economic changes was urbanization. This tends to correspond with both a significant rise in the population of American cities, growth in the number of places that you would think of as cities, and changes in the geography of the city that we talked a little bit about in the last lecture, where you increasingly have working class neighborhoods, middle class neighborhoods, manufacturing areas, immigrant neighborhoods, neighborhoods devoted to recreation, devoted to saloons, taverns, entertainment, and these kinds of things. And it isn't just that urbanization causes growth in the size of cities. It also causes changes in urban structure. There are also a variety of ways in which these economic developments lead to what you might think of as symbiotic relationships between cities and peripheries. People who make raw materials upstate in New York are in many ways as tied to the economy of New York as people who actually live in New York. For example, a little bit later in the semester, we will talk some about the publishing industry in New York City. And because there was a huge new demand for printed material as consumer goods in the city, this changed the way trees were produced in the American Northeast because of the degree to which more and more Americans were more and more interconnected economically because of these economic changes. A last point I would make is that in many of the industries that were transformed by these changes in manufacturing, mechanization and technology frequently came in a little bit after the reorganization of work. That many of these transformations were not driven by new technology, but new kinds of manufacturing technology, machines, new kinds of tools, come into these industries shortly after the kinds of transformations in the organization of work that we've discussed.